let's get started. So game number 1 of this live stream, and we have Mario with his game. He's playing white against David. Okay, I'm not going to pronounce the last name, it doesn't really matter that much anyway. So we see the English and okay. Actually, it was funny, I had a flashback when I looked over this, because I remember long time ago, I don't know, when I was very young, maybe 10, 11, 12, I had this position with black, I'm pretty sure, and I thought, I'm gonna be smart. I'm gonna castle here, and if he takes with the bishop on b7, then I'm going to fork his rooks and win a rook. I was like, he cannot take on b7. Well, to my surprise, he did take on b7, but he took with the rook. And I realized, oh no, I have just blundered a pawn, because white is going to win back the exchange here. And it's a pawn up, and I lost that game. So still a vivid memory. But of course, your opponent knew of that trap, and he played c6. Just a little side story here I want to share with you guys. Knight d7. And here are the 3 main moves, Mario. c4, d4 and queen c2. You play a very rare move here, bishop b2. And I think you don't have to commit that early to where you put the bishop on the board. I think it would make sense first to move one of the pawns. Either c4 or d4, maybe d4. And then you can still decide with the bishop. Also queen c2 is another move to stay flexible here, because it's not clear yet if the bishop really belongs on b2, and as we'll see later in the game, it will actually have problems, or it will not be as effective on b2 as it could be on another diagonal. So this is just something to consider. If you're not sure yet where to put the minor piece, then maybe wait a little bit. At first play other useful moves such as d4 or c4 here. So bishop b2, queen c7, now c4. This was your plan, but black plays rightly so e5 here, keeps his strong bishop on g7, which is also protective for the king and protective for these dark squares, which have been weakened by the move g6. d3, rook e8. So I think so far so good. Knight d2, knight c5, knight b3. This all made sense to me. e3. a5, a4, stopping a4 from black, b6, and now I like this, what you did here. I mean, you can also play differently. I briefly looked at d4, but I like what you did here, c5, and it's an appealing move, aesthetic move, and I like that you sacrifice this pawn here. It shows me that you have good position understanding, because you understood that these pawns obviously are weak, and sooner or later you will win back the pawn, and then maybe you can attack another weakness here on c6. So I like this. Queen c2, bishop a6, rook fd1 also makes sense, defending the pawn. So you see, so far I don't have much to criticize, but now we get to, I think, a critical moment in the game. Your opponent also played just a natural move, played rook e8, and now it's the question, how can you proceed here? What can you do next? Obviously, if you take on c5, then the pawn on d3 will be hanging in the end, and you definitely don't have an advantage. So here you need to improve one of your pieces, and that's the piece on b2. Now this is what I was talking about earlier, right? The bishop is not that well placed here, because e5 is sufficiently protected, and it's also in the way of the rook, which is not as effective yet on b1. And you play bishop a3, which is logical, but ultimately black just defends the pawn again with bishop f8, and you haven't gained anything. You should have gone after this pawn of bishop c3, so the other direction. First, maybe counterintuitive to put the bishop in between the queen, but now black has to defend this pawn, which is an important one, otherwise you would get a very nice passed a pawn. And after you place a move like bishop c8, it's not easy to defend the pawn in the first place, right? So after you place a move like bishop c8, and then you can move the bishop out of the way, bishop e1, and you would be doing quite well here. You can increase the pressure on c5 later on. Now already you're threatening again to take, and you gave a line here, rook a6, but I think in general this position is quite difficult to play for black. he has to defend, he has to make sure he keeps everything protected, and you can maneuver your pieces and you have very nice play, maybe double on the b file, attack this pawn a5 again. Difficult to play for black for sure. What I was just wondering, maybe you're afraid of c4. Could be, yes. Could be that this was what you didn't like in this position, c4, and black tries to get rid of the double pawn here. So let's have a quick look. So obviously if you take on a5, then black can take on b3, attack your queen. That doesn't seem to work. So you could take with the knight on a5 here, but then black takes with the pawn on d3, also not too appealing. So let's just take back. Okay, black takes back, I suppose. What else can he do? Well, maybe he should exchange one pair of rooks first. Okay, maybe it doesn't matter, but let's just say he takes back, okay? And now I see some options here, but I think one that makes sense is just to take the pawn on a5 now. You win back the pawn, and you attack the bishop on d5, you attack the pawn on c6, and this is looking pretty bad for black. Obviously if he takes on a5, you take back, and in the end the bishop is hanging. So I think here black is in trouble. Also if the bishop d5, you can go e4 and the bishop is running out of squares and you win material here. So maybe this is what you were afraid of, but it seems that it just works out very well for white here. So yes, this was a critical moment, because after bishop a3, bishop f8, you don't have an advantage really. And sometimes it really boils down to one moment in the game where we need to be attentive. And I recently visited a seminar by renowned coach Jacob Argert, and he talks about different decisions. Sometimes it's very clear what you're playing. It's a simple decision. So for example, the last move was pretty simple. You play the rook, which hasn't really been doing anything in the game, move it to d1 to defend the pawn. That's pretty simple to figure out, right? And then there are decisions which are more important. So there are critical decisions and strategic decisions. And critical decisions are decisions which really change the course of the game. And it's not easy to figure out the next move. And strategic decisions go in the same direction. I hope I'm not mispresenting this right now. Actually, I think critical positions are very much about calculation, actually. It's all about calculation. You need to find the right way to find a win. Here, it's not about calculation that much. It's more strategic decision where you have to figure out what to do next with your pieces. And there are 3 questions that Argert also presents in his books that I can recommend to everybody. And it's a way to figure out what to do if you don't really have a plan. And sometimes it just happens. You play the natural moves, like the last few moves were pretty natural, I would say. And then you need to figure out, what am I doing next? So those 3 questions are, what is my worst place piece? Okay, we already figured this kind of out. The bishop on b2 is not doing too much. What are the weaknesses in the opponent's position? And then we can look at the pawn on a5 is a weakness, and of course these pawns are weaknesses too. And not only pawns can be weaknesses, but squares as well. For example, the square on c4 is a weakness as well. And then the 3rd question is, what is my opponent's threat? What does he want to do next? If it was his move right now, what would he do? And well, not too clear. There's no obvious threat that we need to deal with. Maybe it would improve his position in some way, but there's nothing obvious that's like jumping out. Maybe rook b8, but it's not clear. It's not really clear what he's doing, because the last few moves black has really been just responding. So if we take these questions and we think about it again, then yes, there are these two weaknesses, but the a5 pawn is maybe a more unpleasant weakness for black, as if he loses this pawn, then he will be dealing with this pawn on a4, and this would be quite uncomfortable. And Mario is saying here, consider bishop c3 as first option instead of bishop a3. And but you like the more concrete approach of bishop a3, and I understand that you want to win back the pawn. Maybe also something psychological where you pawn down and you saw, okay, bishop a3, at least I'm winning back the pawn, at least I'm not worse. And yeah, that's also something to deal with. Sometimes we all like to have more material. That's just how we are, not just in chess but in life in general. We like to have stuff, and we need to be aware of that sometimes in our own games, that sometimes it pays out to delay getting back to material. And Anna is saying the old design is better. All right, yes, that's just a matter of taste, but I'm much more comfortable with this design. All right, so let's see the game. Bishop a3, bishop f8 takes, and now we see mass exchanges here. Bum 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 bum. A lot of trades. We have opposite colors on the board, and obviously you have lost this pawn on d3. You'll now get back the pawn on c6, and the position becomes completely symmetrical. And given that there are opposite colored bishops on the board as well, it is very much equal. So let's see what happens here. Rook c8, and maybe I'm thinking that this is where you relaxed a little bit because you said, okay, this is a dead draw. Maybe this is what you said to yourself during the game, which would not be a wrong assessment. It is, well, very close to dead draw, I guess. But we still need to make the draw. This is sometimes we have to remember that we still have to make moves, and we still have to make the draw. And then we want to make it as easy as possible on ourselves, and this is why we need to stay focused. We don't want to get in a situation where suddenly we have to play only moves to make the draw. This is not a comfortable draw. We want to make a comfortable draw, because this position should be a comfortable draw, of course. So we need to be still attentive. We need to focus and still make sure that we don't give our opponent any chances. Here you play bishop d5. Of course, all the next moves, the position always remains equal, but at some point you get on the wrong path. Maybe it would make sense to just play rook c1 and not allow your opponent to occupy the c file. Maybe you said, okay, I don't want to be in this pin, but you can always play rook c2 or rook c4 if the king approaches. For example, here rook c4 or rook c2, so you can unpin by moving the bishop. And of course, if the rooks come off, it is really a completely dead draw, because of the opposite colored bishops, and well, it's just nothing any side can do. Yeah, g4 is also a useful move in general, because if black wants to do something, it is attached to f5, and if he plays f5, then pawns come off, and every pawn exchange, of course, brings you closer to the draw, or makes the position even more equal than it is already. And here just bishop d5, offering a trade, and now you can even support the bishop with e4, and yeah. I think in general you stayed a little bit too passive here, maybe because you're thinking in your mind, okay, I can do whatever, it will be a draw anyway. Here played rook d1, again g4 would be interesting, and maybe even to fix the pawns with g5 if black allows it, why not? It's a little bit tricky to put pawns on the same color as the opponent's bishop, but if he doesn't have a good way to attack it, then it's also fine. He can support the pawn of h4 as well. Rook d1, king e7, again here g4 was possible. Yeah, it seems like you lose some time here with the next bishop moves. Okay, let's see what happens. So far so good. Black does some advance his pawns and plays e4. But here now the next moves are just waiting, and I think you could have just become more active because black is not threatening anything. The rook and the bishop, yes, they're nicely placed, but you can defend the pawn obviously with the bishop, and your rook can do something. After you played king f1, there's no more bishop e1, so you could just become active here. And then really there's nothing black can do against an active rook. Now what is he going to do? I don't see anything. If check, you just go here, and if bishop e1, you can, maybe this would worry you. Maybe this is what worried you, I understand. Well, I guess you can just play king f1 back actually. For example, I'm sure there are other ways as well, but this would be a kind of cool way to respond because there's no helpful check for black to give here. So the threat is rook c2, which we need to address, obviously. So another way would be to play bishop e2. But this is already, again, it's not as active as I would like, but why not? I mean, even if you do something like this, what is black doing now? Also the pawn hanging, so on h7, okay, let's just assume it's not hanging. But here you can always give checks, and yeah, I mean, even here, even if black achieves this, just bishop e2 back, doesn't seem like to me that black can make any progress. So I think just activity in general in endgames, as you know, activity is just key. And here you stay passive and just allow black to make some progress, even though position of course remains a draw. And here again, I would just say get active. Rook d8, rook d7, still. Bishop d7, king e5, bishop e5. And now, you know, now we get the situation where it gets a little bit tricky, it gets a little bit uncomfortable. Black wants to play king f3, he wants to go after the pawn. And if you play bishop e2, there's rook a2, going after this pawn. So now suddenly you have to make a precise move. And this precise move would have been to go rook d5 or rook d7, but rook d5 is better. King f3, now you can just play rook f5, of course. And if bishop c5, you play bishop e2. And you just keep your eyes on the bishop, so black cannot go for the pawn, and there's nothing black can do. So yeah, I'm somewhat confused because this is also the 41st move. I'm not sure with which time control you were playing, but here you make a mistake. Maybe you're only looking at king f3, and this is why you play bishop e8 here to defend against with bishop h5. But black also has another way to attack the pawn, and now you don't have bishop e2 anymore, which was usually your defense. And I guess this is just what you missed, because before you always had this bishop e2 move. And now you lose the pawn, and yeah, that's still a draw. But okay, nobody wants to play this position where you're pawn down and you suddenly from a completely equal position have to defend. So, but sometimes that just happens if we have one moment where we're a little bit unattentive, and then suddenly we get into a situation, then we have to do our best to keep fighting and make life tough for our opponent. So here you play rook h2. I would just bring the bishop back to b2. This seems to me the best square for the bishop. It's protected, it's covering e2, which is a square the pawn would need to pass in order to queen, and then just stay with the rook behind the pawn, I would say. And I don't think that black should be able to win this, but of course he can try for a long time, and he probably will try for a long time, and you need to watch out. Because here again, it seems to me you're staying too passive. The rook on the second rank also can be in the way, so this is tricky. King c2. Yeah, king c2 is a mistake. You could actually play rook c2. And again, get active. Play rook c4. Bring a king to e2. What is black supposed to do here? Rook c4 is coming. Nothing black can do. You can give a check. But rook c4 is coming. I mean, he needs to play something like bishop d2, but now you drive the king back. And obviously, game still continues, but this certainly is good news for you if you're getting the king away. You played king c2, king e4, check, king f4, and now you blundered. You played king to d1. You need to bring the bishop back to safety. This is the best square, like I said, defended, covering e2. And yeah, but of course it's uncomfortable here. I mean, already this rook doesn't have many places, moves to go. Maybe black even plays something king g3, king f3. Yeah, will be tough. Maybe king f3 immediately as well. This could be a threat of rook a2 sometimes. Yeah, won't be fun to defend it, but you're still holding on, and always gotta make it as hard as possible for your opponent. After king d1, rook d3, it's just game over immediately as you lose the bishop on c6. So yeah, that's of course very unfortunate that you lost this endgame, but I think it's also a great lesson to take away. And I've had my own share of similar painful experiences where I lost also endgames that were just completely equal. And I also won a lot of endgames that were completely equal. And it's just a good reminder for us to remember, game's not over until it's over, until the score sheet is signed. And I like to repeat this point a lot in these live streams because it's something we always tend to forget when we're over the board, and then we have a concentration lapse and suddenly we find ourselves in an unpleasant position and we have to adjust to the new situation, and that's difficult. And we're maybe angry at ourselves, and all of that of course doesn't help when we need to defend, and then more mistakes creep in and we lose a position that we never would have dreamed to lose probably. So good reminder, and always to keep it in our minds, game is only over when the score sheets are signed, when the clock has been stopped, when we have shaken hands with our opponent and all of that, of course. Let me check the chat. Okay. You're saying I had only 40 seconds left, so it was a very short time control. And you're saying after King D3 you had 4 seconds left. Where's King D3? King... I cannot find King D3 right now. Anyways, you're saying that you had very little time on the clock, and this of course explains also the blunders in the end. But I'm sure when you got to this endgame you still had some more time left, and yeah, I guess this is also where you of course need to look for the mistake, as you should have tried maybe a little bit harder to shut the game down, to just force a draw somehow so it wouldn't come to this, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier, to when it's a completely equal, then to find ways to make it, to shut down the game, just make it dead draw. So yeah, big lesson here definitely to take away. And other than that, yeah, I think the other critical moment, like I said, where I also spent a lot of time, was with the bishop move and going not after a c5 pawn but for the a5 pawn.